Okay, hi. Again, my name is Monty Mitchell and LEI North America. And I want to introduce Kara Gabris. And she'll talk a little bit about some work that we did at the Houston Food Bank.
All right. So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited today to get to talk to y'all about the connection that I had with LEI and how we worked together with the Houston Food Bank to do some really neat things. So today's session is about providing more meals for impoverished people. All right. So again, my name is Kara Gabris. I am the Director of Distribution at the Houston Food Bank. My background, I am a registered dietitian. I also have a master's in business, and I have been with the Houston Food Bank for just about 5 years now. And then we also have Monty Mitchell. He is at the control today. And so he was on the LEI side of this project. And just wanted to give a brief little background. We were connected with LEI sometime around this time last year. Just mutually had a connection with another project that we were working on. And then once we were connected with LEI, we embarked on a about 6-month project. There were two aspects to this project. One is what I'm going to be focusing on today, which was within our kitchen operations. And then we had another project that ran alongside that was in our warehousing operations side. So I wanted to just take a moment to talk a little bit about food banks in general, what they are, what we do at food banks, and then I'm going to get a little bit more granular with what we do at the Houston Food Bank, and then I'll get into the project that we worked on. So first and foremost, food banks are everywhere. I was very fortunate that this past spring, I was invited to the Global Food Banking Network Conference in Mexico City. And to be very honest, I was shocked when I walked into this global room full of all of these food banks from Chile, from Kenya, from Ireland. Food banks are everywhere. And for the most part, we are doing the same thing. We are taking in food from local farmers, from food manufacturers, from retailers and grocers. And we are taking food that can either no longer be sold at the retail level, or maybe a farmer has produced an excess amount of food and they can't harvest everything to sell. We take that food in to the food bank, and then we essentially redistribute that food to our network partners. Typically, when we think of our network partners, these are community organizations. They could be a local church, a school, but any kind of community organization that wants to help and support and feed the community. That's who we're working with, who then works directly with the consumer that takes in that food for their family. Another thing that I wanted to mention with food banks is that for the United States, we are more focused on food banks meeting the needs of people who are hungry. We talk about hunger in terms of food insecurity. This really, what that means is that people don't necessarily know on a consistent basis where their next meal is coming from. And so food banks come in and step into that space and help connect those food resources to those people that are in need of that. What I have found interesting, and I just want to touch on this really briefly, is that while food banks all across the world are doing this work, there is a growing kind of change in some food banks that are in different areas, that there is also a major impact on climate change. So food banking not only is helping feed people who are in need of that resource, but also if we are redirecting this food away from landfills, this also has a major impact on climate change. And so there are many food banks that are really working in that space. Just a little bit about the Houston Food Bank. So we operate in exactly that manner. We are taking food in from a variety of different places. I will also say, in addition to those retailers, farmers, food manufacturers, for the Houston Food Bank and for many food banks in the United States, one of our other big food sources is the United States government. So approximately 60% of the food that comes in through the food bank is donated product. Currently, about 30% of our food comes from the US government, and just a very, very small percentage, less than or equal to 10% of our food is what we're actually purchasing. So that food comes in, and then we distribute through a network of approximately 1,600 partners to get that food out. And we have a very large service area in Southeast Texas. To give you an idea of what that scale is, there is approximately 1 million people that live in our service area that are considered food insecure. So again, they don't know on a consistent basis where their next meal is coming from. Also, to put into some perspective of the Houston Food Bank, we are the largest food bank in the United States in terms of distribution size. In our last fiscal year, we provided 123 million meals into our service area in Southeast Texas. Another point that I wanted to mention too is approximately 40+% of our total distribution is comprised of fresh produce. So we're working a lot more in the perishable space. So for this particular project, again, we had two projects with LEI. This one that I'm going to be talking about today, it took place in our kitchen. So we have a industrial kitchen in our facility. This kitchen has the capacity to produce up to 20,000 meals in a day if it was running at full capacity. We do not run it at full capacity every day. So typically there are two main programs that we operate out of this kitchen. One program happens during the school year, and the other happens in the summer. And this particular program is aimed at feeding children. Another fact about our service area is approximately 1 out of 5 children in our service area is considered food insecure. And so this programming really helps to provide these children who are in need of food with that nourishment. During the school year, we provide meals mostly to after-school programs and daycares, and it's mostly made up of breakfasts and lunches and snacks. During the school year, we're producing approximately 5,000 meals in this kitchen per day. However, during the summertime, when school is no longer in session and there are many children who rely on getting fed at school, we ramp up our kitchen production to serve and produce approximately 10,000 meals each day. And we work with approximately 1,500 sites to be able to distribute to all of those children that are in need. One more thing to note before I move on to the next slide. There is a very unique challenge associated with this program in the kitchen. While we have many paid staff members that are they're preparing the meals or doing the cooking and prep, we rely on volunteers to actually plate this food and package it to be able to ship it out. And so it's great. We're getting the community involved in this project. Um, However, it is a unique challenge for us that we essentially get new workers in every single day to help support this program. And so just kind of putting that as some food for thought as I move into the next part of this presentation. Um, so when we embarked on this project, we got a target. And like I mentioned, in the summertime, we ramp up to produce approximately 10,000 meals a day. And so that was what the target was set. We need to produce 10,000 meals per day. They need to be a good quality, and they also need to be on time. Another kind of background about this program is there are time constraints that we have to be at these feeding sites by specific times as per regulation for these programs. And so time was very important for this project. For our initial observations, the biggest thing, immediately is we looked at cycle time. And so we looked at cycle time on the line of the food trays are passing through each food station and getting a scoop or getting tongs of different food items on that tray. And we were looking at what time do we need to have that down by so that we can in turn produce 10,000 meals per day in that timeline that we need. And what we determined is that to do that effectively per day, we needed to keep that cycle time at or below 3 seconds. Our lowest cycle time, so we knew this was possible, is we saw that we could get repetitive results at 2.6 seconds. But we were averaging about 3.4 seconds with the highest fluctuation cycle time at 7.6. So there's quite a wide window of fluctuation when we were seeing that food being plated. And so we looked at all kinds of things that were attributing to this fluctuation time. And I will go into those details in the next couple of slides, but I wanted to just touch on, there were many, many things that were both observed and then in turn addressed that we provided interventions to. And so I won't talk through all of them, but I just wanted to focus on some of those key findings and then those key interventions. So our strategy was to look at 3 specific areas. Number one, it was really looking at that fluctuation, what was causing the cycle time to be between that 7.6 all the way down to that 2.4 seconds. And then how can we keep that fluctuation? How can we reduce that and keep that under that 3 seconds per cycle? So reducing fluctuation. We also really wanted to prioritize safety. The kitchen has definitely a lot of safety components to it. And so doing this project while keeping safety in mind was also just a top priority. And then there was also that quality introduction, and I'll go through kind of what we looked at with each of those areas. So when we looked at that fluctuation and what was causing that, we did find that there was many different areas that were leading to that big differential in time. And so number one, and really what's illustrated on this slide, I would say the biggest was scheduling. So what we found initially is that there was no logical schedule that was associated with the kitchen preparation. And so if you can imagine, if we're making a meal that has chicken, it has broccoli, and it has rice, some of the items would start to be prepared at 5 a.m. And then we would start the pot of rice. Then we would put the chicken in the oven. And at the time that we needed to start running the tray line, we were observing that sometimes not all of the rice was ready to go out yet, and maybe not all of the broccoli was ready. And so we worked on providing a scheduling system. We actually use magnets and a time frame that is stuck onto the kitchen wall. That was just a very easy visual for all of the kitchen staff to be able to see, okay, I know that it takes 27 minutes to cook the broccoli. And so in order to get this entire, the 10,000 meals produced of the broccoli component, I need to start it at this time because it's going to take this amount of time increments to prepare that. So scheduling was one of the first things that we looked at and addressed with the kitchen team. The other area that we noticed that was really causing these fluctuations in time was the line replenishment. So that actually, as you are working on the line and scooping the food onto the individual trays, there were times when the volunteers didn't have any food to scoop onto their tray because the food on the tray line was not available. And so we did some standardized work with the volunteers and instructed there to be different really responsibilities for each volunteer activity. And one of those was line replenishment. And giving two individuals, we decided that was the perfect amount of labor that needed to do that. That their responsibility was to ensure that the line was always had food on it and ready for the volunteers to fill the trays. The other thing that we noticed that was causing some time issues was just natural human behavior. So when we are scooping food in using ladles, using scoops, the natural behavior was for people to scoop the food and then shake it off to kind of level it out before putting it in the tray. But when we're talking about seconds being so important to get to that 10,000 meals per day, every second counts. And when we're shaking that tool before putting it into the food tray, that was causing more time to be spent. And so we did run some trials where we tested and found that just the scoop and put into the tray was just as effective of getting that quality, that consistent weight of what portion size that needed to be at the end. That was just as effective and more time saving than it was to shake and level each scoop. And then the last thing that we looked at was just the production flow and how things operated in practice. When we first observed the line running, it was very stressful. It didn't feel like a great environment. What was happening is that some areas of the line maybe moved faster than others. And what was happening is that those individual food trays were getting smushed up against each other. And there was a sense of being rushed, that you have to move faster because I'm moving faster. And so when we started to slow down, and we encourage the volunteers, please don't push the trays along until the person in front of you is ready for another tray. That actually did a couple of things. It helped to relax the volunteers that were in the kitchen and even the staff. But also that did impact the quality of that tray later on. And so some good things came out of that as well. Safety was definitely priority in this. There's two specific areas of safety that we put interventions around. Number one was doing a quality check that was inclusive of taking the temperature of random trays throughout the line process. So what we were doing is, and this is exactly the piece of paper that was used in the kitchen, is this hot meal quality check paper. And it was one of the cook's responsibilities to come and grab a couple of test trays and weigh it, take the temperature of it, and do a visual inspection. But most importantly, we wanted to make sure that that temperature was going to be adequate for that serving temperature. The other thing too, just as a side note, after putting in these standardized work processes, especially with the volunteers, there was a better understanding of what each individual was truly responsible for during that experience, and that also generally created a more safe environment for those volunteers and for the staff to be in, because people understood where they needed to be at a given time. And really in a kitchen, that is so important. And again, just feeding off from that previous slide, that quality introduction. One of the things that we found too, really associated with what I talked about previously with that pace, that production pace, being so fast and almost stressful. When we first started looking at this, we were also finding that because it was so fast, that sometimes the food was getting mixed together. So this program is specifically aimed for children, and the trays that we use have 3 compartments in them: one for protein, usually one for a starch or a grain, and then one for a vegetable. And what we were finding is, because the line was sometimes moving so fast, when volunteers were scooping that food, sometimes the broccoli or the vegetable would go into the compartment with the chicken in it, and it would get all kind of jumbled up. And I know if you have children or have watched young children eat, many of you know that a lot of children do not like their food to touch, each other. And so we definitely thought, number one, it doesn't really look visually appealing, but also for our audience, this is maybe not effective if we're trying to really feed these children. And then the other thing that we looked at just with quality is the weight of that final tray, and were we consistently putting the correct amount of food in each tray. Also thinking about children's behavior of this possibility of a child looking over at their friend and saying, wait a minute, you have more food than what I do. And that being a result of that volunteer experience, plating that food too quickly, or without, enough time to visually inspect that, that was correct. So we took test trays, weighed them, looked at their appearance, looked at the temperature, just for that final quality check. Really, the outcomes of this project were quite amazing. One of the things that I did not touch on earlier, that was happening in part of the scheduling challenge, is that sometimes we would run out of food on the line, and not just run out of food that, okay, we were waiting on it to be replenished by a volunteer to put it on the line tray. It was truly sometimes we were not producing enough food at that scheduled time, and we had to wait for the kitchen to continue to cook more food to fulfill that. So after these interventions were introduced, one of the most exciting things that we saw is that we were not running out of food during production. And that was so exciting for all of the kitchen staff to see that it was possible to run this operation in a way that we weren't worried that we would be waiting at the end, or that we would run out of food. Sometimes the other thing that would happen is we would overproduce food. And so with the scheduling also came better forecasting. And so we were not wasting as much either during this process. We hit our target. We hit that 10,000 meals. We actually, I think at our highest point in the summer, hit a little over 13,000 meals, which is amazing. And we had our production times on schedule. For the Houston Food Bank, really what this did was, again, we reduced our food waste because we were producing on time, at at the forecasting that we had decided. That was like we finally figured out how much we needed to produce for each feeding session. We served more individuals more efficiently. We live in a disaster-prone area. And so the ability for us to quickly scale how many meals that we can produce, there were so many takeaways from this, that if we were to be in a situation where we had to operate at our full capacity of producing 20,000 meals per day, doable, because we have the tools for how we need to schedule, what needs to be produced at what time, how to forecast how much needs to be cooked per day, what the volunteers are responsible for doing when they're assigned to this task, etc. And just really, I would say in general too, this experience greatly improved for both staff and volunteers because of this. When we're operating at a more calm, understood pace, it's just a better experience for everybody. And we were on time with our deliveries. My applications for just how this applies to this group. Number one, I really would like to give a call to action to everybody. Knowing that there are food banks just all over the world, I really encourage everybody who's on this call, if you have never visited a food bank in your area, please do so. I think that there's so much that food banks can glean from LEI and lean thinking. And so I just encourage, please get involved, reach out to your local food bank. And I really hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I did want to turn it over to Monty to give some final wrap-up words of his experience.
Yeah, so great. Thanks, Kara. That was a great presentation. And just to tie on to what Kara just mentioned, I had my thoughts around food banks before I visited. I actually got kind of emotional every time I showed up there, just behind the purpose and the actual work that was taking place to make sure that we were feeding people that needed that type of support. So as Kara mentioned, I encourage you all to spend a little time at your local food bank. That wraps it up for this particular presentation. You all have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.